Back when I was a kid, the internet wasn't what it is today. There were no gaming websites or YouTube to tell you what games were coming out, which ones were good, and what was crap. So how did we find stuff out? Well, other than rumors on the playground, which were usually just nonsense made up by other kids, we had gaming magazines. Gaming magazines were usually released monthly and would talk about the latest news, reviews, and rumors when it came to the world of gaming. I'm gonna start things off by talking about the first gaming magazine that I would always read as a kid, Nintendo Power. Get the power, Nintendo Power. Nintendo would release this magazine monthly starting in 1988, and it ended up becoming one of the longest running gaming magazines, completing its 24-year run at the end of 2012. Nintendo Power, despite being biased towards some of their own games, was the best way to find out what games you might want to play, as well as guides on games you already loved. In fact, it all started for me with this Dragon Warrior strategy guide by Nintendo Power. It showed some cool original artwork, along with pictures and information on all of the monsters and maps of the world and its multiple dungeons. Back when I played Dragon Warrior on the NES, I wasn't old enough to read yet, so I would just go back and forth between Tentacle Castle and Garenham, grinding my ass off on slimes and ghosts and drakies. It wasn't until I got this guide here that I learned where all the different monsters were and how to get there. I'm going to apologize ahead of time for those of you that aren't JRPG fans. I was a JRPG fan for most of my life, particularly Dragon Warrior or Dragon Quest, as well as Final Fantasy, so most of the magazines I had to scan were about these kinds of games. But that's not all I played growing up. I would also play great action platformers like Mega Man and Ninja Gaiden. And despite being incredible, these games could also be brutally difficult, especially for young kids. That's where Nintendo Power came in. I love looking at all the maps of the stages and how detailed they were when telling you what to watch out for and how to get past certain parts. Mega Man 3 had some of the best cheats in its classified information segment of the magazine as well. Classified information was always jam-packed with tips and tricks on how to either cheat the game, perform glitches, find secrets, or just get by some of the more difficult parts. My personal favorites are using the super jump in Mega Man 3, which requires you to hold the right button down on the second player D-pad when jumping to perform some kick-ass low-gravity jumps. Another one that would appear quite frequently was the bonus Belmont's cheat in the Castlevania games, where if you entered your name as Help Me, you could start the game with 10 lives. There's even this overly complicated chart showing you all the Mega Man 3 special weapon strengths and weaknesses. Besides just helping players out and showing them some cool shit you didn't know you could do in the games, Nintendo Power also had some crazy ads from time to time. Like this psycho wearing fingerless gloves trying to get you to subscribe to the magazine or spend shitloads of money entering a draw or calling the Nintendo 1-900 hotline. Or how about these random Nintendo consoles magically rocketing through space? Another form of advertising was done in these cool little comic strips that would sometimes have original Nintendo Power characters hanging out in your favorite video games. My personal favorites were always the Battletoads comics, though. Nintendo Power's bizarre ads are one thing, but what I really want to talk about now are what I like to call Nintendo Power games. Nintendo Power games were games you'd always see in Nintendo Power, but you never knew anyone who actually owned the games. And until recently, you'd never played them yourself, despite always kind of wanting to. Some of these were games I ended up getting as a kid, but others like Kickmaster, Vice Project Doom, and womp'em are incredible games that I never got to play until adulthood. Nintendo Power games like Power Blade, Rockin' Cats, and Star Tropics are games I picked up as a kid and instantly fell in love with. But every once in a while, Nintendo Power would promote some absolute bullshit, like the redundant and barely working laser scope helmet, or betraying every 90s kid by making the Star Wars NES game look like something we'd want to play. Showing us the games and how to beat them was a major part of why we loved Nintendo Power back in the day, but today, I love just picking up a magazine and flipping through it and getting that intense rush of nostalgia. It really takes you back to that era of gaming when this was your only source of information on your favorite hobby. But cheats, guides, and nostalgia wasn't all these magazines had to offer. You could also learn about how these consoles and cartridges actually worked. I thought this was so cool as a kid and helped me bond with my dad when we would take apart the NES to see what was actually inside for ourselves. I loved all these things about Nintendo Power, but I haven't really touched too much on what one of my favorite features was when I was a kid. That was the fact that you could actually write into Nintendo Power and talk to its writers and editors trying to find out more information about your favorite games. Or you could just send them a picture of your pets or show your appreciation by sending pics of you dry humping your brand new NES console. Back in the early 90s, Nintendo Power had it all. They even had their own yearly game awards. You always felt like you were in the loop when it came to the latest gaming news, but what about the mid-90s when I became more of a Genesis kid, or when the Sony PlayStation, Sega Saturn, and 3DO were just hitting the market? What about when Final Fantasy completely took over and ran the gaming world in the late 90s and early 2000s? Nintendo Power was king in its time, but after a while people were looking for more information about some of their other consoles, which is why I'd like to welcome you back for Gaming Magazine's A Trip Through Time Part 2, where I take a look at some of the other gaming magazines like EGM, GamePro, Tips and Tricks, and of course PlayStation Magazine. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn notifications on. You can also catch me at least 3 nights per week streaming on Twitch at twitch.tv/dookie03. Have a good one, and I hope to see you in the next video.